Hi, gonna show you my take on the tech adept and uses a couple of different interactions. That's kind of interesting. You need a purity seal of trauma to inflict the bleed, and the techy Martyr Westman demon forge with the suicide armor, we call it. I take bleeding damage when I'm inflicting bleed, so I'm constantly gonna take bleed ticks, which is gonna prompt my constructs to use that chance to trigger fabric or scatter field on hit taken. So I use two vivisectors and a healing turret, and all of them have that enchant. So I get in 8 vivisectors that constantly exploding and do a massive amount of suppression damage and knockdown for crowd control. And it's really interesting in group play because you control big hordes of enemies fairly easily, uh, and you have the healing for the group as well. To help myself with some damage, I'm using an enrage setup with enrage on crit, resistances, some shock and AoE, damage per enrage token, and some healing. Uh, More tokens and main stat logic is kind of really important. Teleporter with fear, even more chance to take away suppression super quickly. Roll defenses on armor and use the shock doctrine, because that helps you with your damage massively. And if you're going to be crowd controlling and healing, picking off small targets helps a lot so you don't get swarmed. More main stats and AoE damage, vulnerability, kind of basic. Um, Not a great inoculate. I would prefer to have another booster in there, but yeah. Uh, and then I use the Voltaic Strike because it shocks and stuns. So since I'm shredding suppression super quickly and it has a massive AoE, I can get that shock explosion to trigger quite often. And I'm using fairly low cooldown on it, so basically the only attack I'm using. A bit of extra damage with fear, and then the big kicker here is the general vulnerability and debuffing. And how this works is when you apply a debuff, you have a chance to have an extra vulnerability stack. And the extra vulnerability stack applies basically instantly when you're using a fear aura. So you get 10 stack. That's massively just going to increase the damage enemies take. And since it's a debuff or vulnerability stack, it also means that I'm applying the shock status basically instantly just by walking into a pack, which in turn triggering the shock explosion. I have a bit of extra vivisectors. Using this for cooldown on my slam to be able to use it more often. You can swap it for probably Blessing of Saint Victorious would be a good shout so you don't get one-shotted in higher missions. And since I'm constantly taking damage from the bleed, I'm getting a massive amount of healing from my constructs as well. The main stat is logic, um, and it's not that important. That's the least important one. You fill it out when you can. Bionics, you can go for 20 points here to more damage reduction. But I'm not using it at the moment. But it's actually better than logic if you want to go for tankiness. And then you need quite a bit of mind link for data flux and damage reduction. So as you see, so you get your damage reduction cap because you need to be a fairly bit tanky. Try to get close to 30% crit. I'm a bit low. And over 46 crit strength, so your crits do a little bit more damage. Helps quite a lot. I'm using the teleporter, as you saw, and because I like moving around, and it helps me for my setup. Because I teleport into a pack, the heat aura gonna inflict a bleed on a target, so I'm inflicting bleed, and then I drop the vivisectors in the pack, and then they starting to knock people down instantly, and I'm triggering explosions as well. Um, Another way to make it, and you kind of need this one as well, the strain transfer. So you share the damage to your constructs, so they're constantly taking bleed damage and constantly healing you. I had slotted in some other that aren't really important, but to make it work, you need strain transfer, the bleed armor, and a reliable way to inflict bleed. You can get it on weapons as well, but until you have a zero trauma, you can roll it on your weapons. So it's a close quarter build with a decent chunk of AoE damage and some interesting mechanics going around. I'm going to show you a quick mission here. Not going to go to, but we're just going to see how it goes. Put it to plus 16 to get a feel for it. I'm probably not going to complete it. But in the higher tier missions, being able to have a healing turret was actually really useful in a party setup. And the massive amount of knockdowns is insane when you're having those high tier champions, because you take away suppression so quickly, so they are basically just laying down on the floor the whole fight.
Shows terminal levels of Nurgle infestation. Immediate intervention required. May the Deus Mechanicus lead you to galvanic salvation.
As you can see, it's constantly starting the explosions around me. And wrong way. You see all these blue fields? It's actually doing a lot of suppression damage. And you can just walk past what you don't want to fight. Due to the fact you're healing so much. So yeah, it's not the greatest DPS build ever in the game, but it can get some work done. The single targets is a bit lacking as well, of course, since you are focusing on AoE.
Aerial dispersion of demonic pathogen
but
detected.
As you can see, you need to constantly stun them because they start to slide away
terminal lung rot.
From you when they start exploding. But it's constantly gonna trigger. So it's just naturally gonna do a lot of. Because you see the plague gargoyles and everything. Haven't even hit them, but they are at no suppression and just laying on the floor. Big crap fight like this, you just walk in and slam a couple of times, clear them out. Don't forget to pick up your supplies, because you want to use the teleporter for... It's going to help you massively for your setup in a fight. If you want to leap in to start clearing stuff and getting your vivisectors in a good position. Walk in, bam. You see, the suppression is gone before the enemy is down, and that makes him so it's crowd control. And in higher tier missions, in a group setting when they have massive amount of suppression and damage, if they can't hit you, they can't do damage. Literally.
Infection source cauterized.
I have forgotten a decent chunk. Anyway, leap in, vivisectors, slam, all vivisectors, slam. Stop a healing turret if you need to. Do some single target hits so we go down. So it's some interesting mechanics going around here. You can probably slot Berserk from the build for to get more damage out of it, I'm guessing. But it's not as reliable in a group setting to keep it up. And I wanted to have something for a group or group setting.
The
And to blanket the whole screen with those explosions, you have
such mistakes deserve
do a
immediate
lot
retribution.
Of crowd control. The areas on it is massive, and with I only have 8 vivisectors. You can have more, of course, but this is the way I prefer to play it, and good hunting for gear and try it out. It's real fun.